June 4th, 1943, Railroad Street, Mexia, Texas. A pencil quivered in the hand of Unificia Vera Burkhart as he inscribed hidden thoughts in his diary, words that, if discovered, would have earned him solitary confinement. The Americans cannot be telling the truth. No nation could display such wealth while engaged in a two-front war. Through the train window he had just witnessed a reality that defied 3 years of Nazi propaganda. Every farmhouse, street corner, and shop blazed with electric light. A vast constellation of illumination stretched across the Texas plains at 10 o'clock at night. In Germany, blackout regulations had shrouded the Reich in darkness since 1940. Rural electrification had reached barely 20% of farms even before the war. Here, in what propaganda claimed was a decadent, collapsing America, electricity flowed freely. 1,850 veterans of Irwin RML's Africa Corps disembarked from cushioned Pullman coaches, not cattle cars or freight wagons, complete with dining and sleeping services. Mexia's entire population had gathered to witness their arrival, unaware that this moment would initiate a profound psychological transformation, the systematic dismantling of Nazi ideology through the sheer display of American industrial power. Victory would be measured not in battlefield maneuvers, but in production statistics destined to overturn every assumption these soldiers held about their homeland enemies and cause. The collapse began on May 13th, 1943 in Tunisia. General Jürgen von Arnim, RML's successor, surrendered alongside 250,000 to 275,000 German and Italian troops. Numbers fluctuated as scattered units continued capitulating over days. The Wehrmacht's most seasoned desert fighters, men who had driven the British back to Egypt and earned Montgomery's grudging respect, suddenly became prisoners. Among them, headman Friedrich Radke, Iron Cross first-class recipient, veteran of France, twice wounded in North Africa. His diary, later found in the National Archives, would offer historians unparalleled insight into the psychological impact of American captivity on German soldiers. From Oruran, Algeria, as Radke and 30,000 others waited for transport ships in makeshift camps, American efficiency began eroding preconceptions. Thousands were processed daily with a precision surpassing anything the Wehrmacht had achieved at its height. Identity card photographed and filed, medical checks completed, inoculations administered, Geneva Convention rights explained in fluent German by officers trained specifically for this purpose. The first true shock came with food. Oberreiter Hans Muir, captured with the 21st Panzer Division, wrote 8 months later, "In the cage at Oruran, waiting for ships, Americans fed us better than 6 months of desert rations. White bread, real coffee, meat twice daily. We assumed propaganda, not realizing this was standard American military fare. The Liberty ships transporting them across the Atlantic were themselves monuments to industrial power." The SS Robert E. Peary had been built in 4 days, 15 hours, 29 minutes at Kaiser Shipyards, Richmond, California, a fact deemed impossible by any German familiar with propaganda. These vessels, produced at rates of 3 per day at peak, returned from supply runs with human cargo, up to 30,000 POWs monthly by summer 1943. The 2-week Atlantic crossing became the second phase of psychological dismantling. Feld Kurt Zimmermann of the 90th Light Division noted that American sailors discarded more daily food than his company had received in weeks. Half-eaten steaks, full loaves, gallons of milk left to spoil. No mockery, simply abundance. German prisoners were unloaded at a military dock in Brooklyn and promptly transported by train to Camp Shanks, a sprawling processing facility in Orangeburg, New York. Every movement was regimented with precision, a stark contrast to the chaos of retreating desert units. Trains, though ordinary in design, moved with clockwork accuracy. Each car contained bunks, lavatories, and even small stoves for hot meals, a far cry from the cramped, often filthy freight cars that had ferried them across Europe. Processing spanned 3 days. Prisoners underwent meticulous documentation, personal details recorded, photographs taken, and items inventoried. Military police searched them thoroughly. Interrogations sought tactical and organizational intelligence, but even routine officers marveled at how cooperative many prisoners became under the calm, non-threatening environment. Psychological adjustment began here. Simple gestures, offering coffee, explaining rights, handing out newspapers, seemed alien to men conditioned for discipline and fear. The Americans demonstrated efficiency in everything. Barracks were clean, beds made with tight sheets, showers maintained with warm water, and sanitation at levels unimaginable to troops accustomed to desert dust and mud. Camps were supplied not by improvisation, but through a highly coordinated industrial chain. Food arrived daily, fuel and materials replenished before depletion, medical care available on demand. Oberleutnant Friedrich Kloss of the 164th Infantry later remarked that nothing in Africa or Europe prepared a man for such organized comfort. Food remained the most striking revelation. Breakfast on the first full day included fresh orange juice, eggs cooked to order, hot coffee, buttered rolls, and fruit, luxuries that German soldiers had not seen in months, if not years. Lunch and dinner followed with equal abundance: meats, vegetables, desserts, and even ice cream. Many officers initially assumed these were exceptions or propaganda tricks, but each day repeated the same pattern. Hunger, once a constant companion, vanished almost immediately, leaving only awe and disbelief. Beyond sustenance, everyday American life impressed the prisoners. Small towns along the train route featured electricity, paved streets, public schools, and libraries, an infrastructure Germans assumed existed only in propaganda images of idealized America. Fields were meticulously irrigated, farms mechanized, and rail yards humming with activity. To soldiers trained to measure strength in tanks, guns, and boots, the real power seemed abstract, yet undeniable. It lay in logistics, production, and social stability. Camp Shanks itself became a microcosm of the broader industrial ecosystem. Trucks, cranes, and forklifts moved goods efficiently. Messages transmitted via telegraph and telephone coordinated every aspect of the facility. Prisoners observed, noted, and often compared this efficiency to the overstretched bureaucratic systems of the Reich. Even minor details mattered. Laundry delivered promptly, medical attention provided without delay, and strict adherence to schedules demonstrated a civilization operating with methodical rhythm. This exposure triggered subtle, cumulative shifts in perception. Men who had once derided American soldiers now questioned assumptions about their nation's capacity to wage war. Letters home described luxuries and organization, spreading cognitive dissonance. Though still loyal to the Reich, many prisoners privately began to doubt the inevitability of German victory. The war in Europe, already turning against the Axis, now seemed as much a contest of infrastructure and resource management as of bullets and artillery. As days passed at Camp Shanks, the German prisoners began to settle into a rhythm dictated by American efficiency. Daily routines were precise, yet unexpectedly humane. Roll call occurred each morning, but it was punctuality, not intimidation, that mattered. Meals were served on strict schedules, yet the food itself, the abundance of fresh meat, vegetables, and desserts, required no rationing, no worry about spoilage. Soldiers who had survived months on hardtack and powdered rations found themselves marveling at simple pleasures: a hot cup of coffee, a soft roll, or the occasional slice of pie. Labor assignments kept the prisoners occupied, ranging from camp maintenance to assisting with logistics under supervision. These tasks, although mundane, provided structure and a sense of purpose absent from their months of retreat and combat. Unlike forced labor in occupied territories, these duties were framed by rules, oversight, and safety standards, leaving little room for fear. For many, the monotony was comforting, a predictable order replacing the chaos of frontline service. Interaction with American personnel revealed another layer of contrast. Guards were professional but rarely hostile. Instructions were delivered with clarity, not contempt. Medical personnel conducted routine checkups, treating illnesses and injuries efficiently. Even small kindnesses, a smile, a cigarette, or extra rations produced a profound emotional impact. Soldiers accustomed to brutal discipline and scarcity found themselves re-evaluating the assumptions they had carried about enemy forces. Recreation and education became a subtle tool of adaptation. Prisoners had access to books, newspapers, and limited sports activities, Some attended lectures on American culture and language, though attendance was voluntary. The opportunity to read about US industry, geography, and society deepened the cognitive shock already triggered by the material abundance around them. Many officers documented these observations in letters or diaries, noting a growing awareness that the United States' strength extended far beyond the battlefield. Psychologically, the impact was profound and cumulative. Hunger, fear, and uncertainty, a constant companion in the European theatres, were replaced by comfort, predictability, and a sense of personal security. Prisoners began to notice disparities between what they had believed about America and what they experienced firsthand. Letters to Germany often included astonished descriptions of daily life. Our quarters are warm, food is plentiful, there is water, light, and even medical care without waiting. These accounts, though cautious, spread doubt and fascination among those still fighting abroad. Beyond individual reflections, camp life subtly eroded rigid hierarchies. Junior enlisted men often found themselves on equal footing with officers within the structured environment of the camp. The shared exposure to abundance, fairness, and routine created a leveling effect, challenging assumptions about class and command. Observers noted that loyalty to the Reich remained, but unquestioning belief in its supremacy began to waver. Even leisure underscored the contrast. Games of soccer, card matches, and informal conversations with guards revealed human commonalities previously denied by war. The prisoners began to recognize the efficiency, intelligence, and industriousness of the American system as a force equal in significance to any weapon. By the end of the first month, many officers admitted privately that victory in Europe was as dependent on infrastructure and production as on strategy and courage. As weeks turned into months, German prisoners began to internalize a startling truth. The United States was a nation of abundance, not just in goods, but in organization, infrastructure, and opportunity. Daily life at the camps became a mirror, reflecting both comfort and discipline, contrasting sharply with the constant deprivation experienced in the European war zones. Soldiers who had braced themselves for harsh punishment instead discovered a regimen that, while strict, fostered stability rather than fear. Observation of American operations deepened this awareness. Work details, supply chains, and even the management of waste and water revealed an efficiency that seemed almost mechanical in its precision. Prisoners noted the availability of machinery and vehicles in quantities unimaginable back home. The factories, ports, and transport hubs they had glimpsed through guarded excursions reinforced a growing understanding. American industrial capacity was unparalleled, and it could sustain a long and multi-front war with a reliability Germany could not match. Cultural exposure became another form of education. Occasional access to newspapers, radio broadcasts, and public announcements provided insights into American life, politics, and values. Some prisoners began to admire aspects of this system, from civic order to social services, even while retaining personal loyalty to Germany. Discussions in mess halls shifted from mundane survival to comparisons between the Reich's propaganda and the reality observed firsthand. The cognitive dissonance was unmistakable. What they had been told about American decadence and weakness often fell flat against the evidence surrounding them. Human interaction reinforced the lessons of efficiency and abundance. Guards, medics, and administrative staff conducted themselves professionally, yet with moments of kindness that challenged entrenched prejudices. Letters home described warmth, plentiful food, and a sense of safety unheard of in occupied territories. In turn, these letters carried seeds of doubt and fascination back to Germany. Junior soldiers, in particular, grappled with the psychological implications. If the enemy could sustain such a society while fighting a global war, how fragile was the image of invincibility propagated at home? Recreation and education programs further amplified the effect. Sports fields, libraries, and optional courses on English and American culture allowed prisoners to occupy their minds constructively. For many, these opportunities to learn and relax were disarming. Simple exposure to normalcy, lights that never dimmed, running water, heat, and adequate nutrition eroded the mental conditioning imposed by years of conflict and scarcity. Gradually, prisoners recognized that survival in America required compliance, but it did not demand fear or submission beyond routine. By mid-1944, these experiences had created a subtle but significant transformation. Prisoners became more reflective, less dogmatic, and increasingly aware of the disparity between wartime reality and ideology. Letters, diaries, and conversations reveal a recurring theme. Admiration, astonishment, and cautious respect for the United States, tempered by loyalty and longing for home. The shock of abundance, initially a source of disbelief, evolved into a quiet acknowledgement of American power, a force built not only on weapons and strategy, but on the full weight of industrial, social, and logistical superiority. The lessons of these months extended far beyond the camps themselves. Many officers understood that the war was not merely a contest of armies, but of systems. Germany's initial victories, achieved through strategy and valor, now appeared increasingly precarious when measured against the sheer capacity, coordination, and resilience of the United States. This realization, slowly nurtured by routine exposure to comfort and order, would linger in the memories of those who survived captivity, shaping their perceptions of the enemy long after the war ended. As the war approached its final stages, preparations for repatriation began. German prisoners were informed that those who had behaved well and followed camp regulations would be returned home first, a policy designed to maintain order and morale. The process was meticulous. Documentation, medical inspections, and logistical planning ensured that every prisoner was accounted for before departure. For many, the anticipation of returning to Germany stirred a mix of relief, anxiety, and lingering curiosity about the country that had treated them with such unexpected order and care. The journey home was itself a study in American efficiency. Trains, ships, and convoys moved with precision, offering a stark contrast to the chaos many had experienced in Europe. Soldiers marveled at the smooth coordination and abundance of resources, from well-stocked dining cars to comfortable sleeping arrangements. Even in transit, the American system demonstrated an ability to maintain control and provide for thousands at once, a lesson not lost on the traveling POWs. Upon arrival in Germany, reactions were complex. Families welcomed their returning relatives with joy, yet soldiers carried invisible baggage, memories of the disciplined, resource-rich life in the US and the stark contrast to the war-torn landscape of their homeland. Diaries and post-war interviews reveal recurring reflections, admiration for American infrastructure, shock at the ease of daily life in captivity, and a recognition that Germany had been fighting not just armies, but an entire industrial and social system far superior in scale. Many returning officers shared their experiences with comrades, contributing to a subtle shift into perception among troops who had not left Europe. Stories of abundant food, comfortable barracks, libraries, and medical care challenged the narratives they had been taught. Even soldiers loyal to the Reich found themselves questioning propaganda that had portrayed the US as decadent and weak. The psychological impact lingered, quietly influencing attitudes toward both the enemy and the global post-war order. Long-term, the experience of captivity left an indelible mark. Former prisoners often cited lessons in organization, hygiene, nutrition, and administration as examples of American efficiency they had never witnessed at home. Some applied these observations in post-war rebuilding efforts, either consciously or subconsciously integrating strategies learned during their stay. The exposure to abundance, discipline, and cultural openness created a nuanced understanding. The enemy was not merely a collection of soldiers to be defeated, but a nation capable of sustaining immense power through systems, logistics, and societal structure. By the time the last prisoners were repatriated, the US had demonstrated an unusual form of soft power. Beyond military might, the humane and efficient management of POWs communicated lessons of industrial capability, cultural confidence, and organizational superiority. For many German soldiers, these months of observation reshaped their worldview, leaving memories of shock, respect, and reluctant admiration that would persist long after the guns fell silent. With the war officially ending, Europe was left a scarred and shattered continent. Cities once filled with life now stood as skeletons of twisted metal and broken stone. Entire neighborhoods lay flattened by bombs, rail lines lay in ruin, and rivers carried debris where bridges once stood. Returning German soldiers stepped into this devastation, their boots crunching over glass and ash, confronted by a homeland that no longer resembled the one they had left behind. Industries that had powered the Reich were now silent, their smokestacks cold, and the air thick with the smell of decay and exhaustion. Food shortages were severe, ration cards returned, but the warehouses were empty. For those who had spent months or even years in American POW camps, the contrast was almost unbearable. They had left behind a world of structure, warmth, and regular meals, and now faced a landscape of scarcity and loss. The orderliness of captivity was suddenly replaced by the chaos of freedom. Memories of the American camps haunted their thoughts. Rows of tidy barracks, mess halls that served food on time, medical stations stocked with supplies, and guards who enforced discipline with fairness rather than cruelty. For many, that period of imprisonment had been paradoxically the most stable part of their wartime experience. Now, standing amid ruins, they experienced a dissonance they could not easily explain. How could the enemy have maintained such abundance and civility while their own nation lay in tatters? That question lingered in countless minds as they faced the overwhelming challenge of rebuilding both their lives and their faith in the future. Many returning soldiers wrestled with deep internal conflicts. The ideology they had once believed in, the vision of German superiority, now seemed hollow when compared with what they had seen abroad. Diaries and post-war letters reveal that these men carried a quiet sense of reckoning within them. They had witnessed a different kind of power, one grounded not in conquest or fear, but in organization, efficiency, and material strength. Some tried to suppress these thoughts, clinging to pride or resentment. Others found inspiration in what they had observed, borrowing methods of hygiene, logistics, and discipline that had impressed them in captivity. A few even spoke of wanting to see their homeland rebuilt on similar foundations, structured, humane, and future-focused. Communities across Germany faced the challenge of absorbing these men back into a civilian world that had little to offer. Jobs were scarce, homes were gone, and hunger was universal. Yet among the returnees were those who carried valuable lessons. Engineers had studied American tools and machines, farmers had seen the efficiency of mechanized agriculture, and ordinary soldiers had learned how large systems could function with discipline and fairness. In subtle ways, these fragments of knowledge began to influence post-war reconstruction. A former prisoner might suggest better organization in a rebuilding project. Another might introduce sanitation methods seen in a POW camp. Slowly, without fanfare, these lessons took root in towns struggling to rise from rubble. Still, the scars of captivity were not easily erased. Nightmares of sirens, confinement, and uncertainty persisted. Even those who had been treated well carried a deep memory of dependence, of being at the mercy of fate. Yet unlike the bitterness that often accompanies defeat, there was a strange mixture of humility and awareness among them. They had seen the power of efficiency and the value of humane treatment, and these realizations would quietly shape their attitudes toward work, authority, and justice in the years to come. Across post-war Germany, such experiences contributed to a slow but profound re-evaluation of national identity. Former POWs were uniquely positioned to understand both sides of modern civilization, the devastation of war and the potential of organized peace. Their stories, told over dinner tables and in workshops, offered glimpses into a society that had prospered even amid global conflict. Friends and family listened with a mixture of disbelief and admiration. For many Germans, these first-hand accounts were the first tangible proof that the world outside the Reich had not been as barbaric or chaotic as propaganda had claimed. Ultimately, the legacy of the American POW camps became part of the unseen foundation of post-war transformation. It was both practical and psychological. Soldiers returned home with eyes opened, not only to the realities of defeat, but to the possibilities of rebuilding through cooperation and order. Historians today recognize that these men carried back more than memories. They brought with them the seeds of modernity, drawn from observation and reflection. Their exposure to American abundance, fairness, and resilience served as an education no classroom could replicate. As the years unfolded after the war, the influence of the American prisoner of war experience began to ripple through post-war Germany in ways few could have imagined. Those who had once worn the uniform of the Wehrmacht returned home carrying more than the scars of defeat. They brought with them a new vision of how a society could function. From factory floors to farmlands and from classrooms to council halls, the lessons absorbed behind barbed wire would quietly shape the rebirth of a nation. Engineers who had observed the vast humming assembly lines of American industry began to replicate what they had seen. The precision, the rhythm, the efficient flow of work, all of it stood in sharp contrast to the rigid hierarchies and outdated methods of pre-war Europe. Back home, these men reimagined production lines, introducing modern mechanization that boosted efficiency and quality. Farmers who had once watched American tractors glide across endless fields recalled the productivity those machines brought. They too began adopting mechanized tools and fertilizers, transforming German agriculture from labor-intensive subsistence to modern agribusiness. What they had witnessed as captives became a blueprint for reconstruction. Beyond industry and agriculture, education emerged as one of the most profound areas of influence. Many POWs had taken advantage of camp universities, where lectures on science, mathematics, languages, and economics were freely offered by fellow prisoners and even American volunteers. When these men returned home, they carried with them an awakened intellectual curiosity. Universities across the newly formed West Germany saw a surge of mature students, former soldiers now hungry for knowledge and progress. They became teachers, engineers, scientists, and administrators, fueling a technological renaissance that helped propel Germany into the modern era. Perhaps the most surprising transformation was ideological. Soldiers who had once sworn allegiance to the Führer found themselves questioning everything they had been taught. Exposure to American liberalism, free press, and civic discourse left an indelible impression. They saw how a society could be both disciplined and free, patriotic yet self-critical. In American towns, they had observed neighbors debating politics openly without fear, an unimaginable act in Nazi Germany. Many returned advocating democratic ideals, encouraging civic participation, and rebuilding the local governance with transparency and accountability. Through these subtle acts, the seeds of modern German democracy were sown not only in the rubble of war, but in the memories of men who had once been enemies. Socially, the effects spread through families and communities. Former POWs told stories of humane treatment, fair rations, and respect from American guards, stories that challenged the propaganda-fed image of the United States as a land of corruption and decadence. These personal accounts softened public attitudes, encouraging reconciliation rather than resentment. In homes and beer halls, conversations shifted from bitterness to curiosity. What made the Americans so productive, so confident, so free? For many, these tales became a bridge between two worlds that had once been divided by hatred. On a deeper level, the experience had reshaped them psychologically, living in abundance after years of rationing, witnessing fairness where they had expected revenge, yet forced introspection. Letters written by former POWs spoke of humility, gratitude, and a growing belief in human dignity. They contrasted the openness of American society with the oppression of their own wartime system. Many resolved to live differently, to build, not destroy, to question, not blindly obey. This quiet moral awakening became one of the most powerful yet overlooked forces in post-war reconstruction. By the mid-1950s, the results were unmistakable. The so-called Wirtschaftswunder, or economic miracle, that rebuilt West Germany, was fueled not only by foreign aid, but also by the attitudes and knowledge carried home by these returning prisoners. They had seen efficient logistics, participatory management, and respect between worker and employer. They brought those lessons into factories, offices, and classrooms. From the smallest workshop to the largest corporation, echoes of the American example resonated through systems of organization, productivity, and innovation. In retrospect, the American POW camps accomplished something no battlefield victory ever could. They became incubators of transformation, schools of democracy, efficiency, and human decency. Soldiers who had entered those camps filled with suspicion and pride emerged as agents of modernization and reform. They learned that strength did not come from fear, but from freedom, that unity was not enforced through violence, but inspired through opportunity, As the years unfolded after the war, the influence of the American prisoner of war experience began to ripple through post-war Germany in ways few could have imagined. Those who had once worn the uniform of the Wehrmacht returned home carrying more than the scars of defeat. They brought with them a new vision of how a society could function. From factory floors to farmlands and from classrooms to council halls, the lessons absorbed behind barbed wire would quietly shape the rebirth of a nation. Engineers who had observed the vast humming assembly lines of American industry began to replicate what they had seen. The precision, the rhythm, the efficient flow of work, all of it stood in sharp contrast to the rigid hierarchies and outdated methods of pre-war Europe. Back home, these men reimagined production lines, introducing modern mechanization that boosted efficiency and quality. Farmers who had once watched American tractors glide across endless fields recalled the productivity those machines brought. They too began adopting mechanized tools and fertilizers, transforming German agriculture from labor-intensive subsistence to modern agribusiness. What they had witnessed as captives became a blueprint for reconstruction. Beyond industry and agriculture, education emerged as one of the most profound areas of influence. Many POWs had taken advantage of camp universities, where lectures on science, mathematics, languages, and economics were freely offered by fellow prisoners and even American volunteers. When these men returned home, they carried with them an awakened intellectual curiosity. Universities across the newly formed West Germany saw a surge of mature students, former soldiers now hungry for knowledge and progress. They became teachers, engineers, scientists, and administrators, fueling a technological renaissance that helped propel Germany into the modern era. Perhaps the most surprising transformation was ideological. Soldiers who had once sworn allegiance to the Führer found themselves questioning everything they had been taught. Exposure to American liberalism, free press, and civic discourse left an indelible impression. They saw how a society could be both disciplined and free, patriotic yet self-critical. In American towns, they had observed neighbors debating politics openly without fear, an unimaginable act in Nazi Germany. Many returned advocating democratic ideals, encouraging civic participation, and rebuilding the local governance with transparency and accountability. Through these subtle acts, the seeds of modern German democracy were sown not only in the rubble of war, but in the memories of men who had once been enemies. Socially, the effects spread through families and communities. Former POWs told stories of humane treatment, fair rations, and respect from American guards, stories that challenged the propaganda-fed image of the United States as a land of corruption and decadence. These personal accounts softened public attitudes, encouraging reconciliation rather than resentment. In homes and beer halls, conversations shifted from bitterness to curiosity. What made the Americans so productive, so confident, so free? For many, these tales became a bridge between two worlds that had once been divided by hatred. On a deeper level, the experience had reshaped them psychologically, living in abundance after years of rationing, witnessing fairness where they had expected revenge, yet forced introspection. Letters written by former POWs spoke of humility, gratitude, and a growing belief in human dignity. They contrasted the openness of American society with the oppression of their own wartime system. Many resolved to live differently, to build, not destroy, to question, not blindly obey. This quiet moral awakening became one of the most powerful yet overlooked forces in post-war reconstruction. By the mid-1950s, the results were unmistakable. The so-called Wirtschaftswunder, or economic miracle, that rebuilt West Germany, was fueled not only by foreign aid, but also by the attitudes and knowledge carried home by these returning prisoners. They had seen efficient logistics, participatory management, and respect between worker and employer. They brought those lessons into factories, offices, and classrooms. From the smallest workshop to the largest corporation, echoes of the American example resonated through systems of organization, productivity, and innovation. In retrospect, the American POW camps accomplished something no battlefield victory ever could. They became incubators of transformation, schools of democracy, efficiency, and human decency. Soldiers who had entered those camps filled with suspicion and pride emerged as agents of modernization and reform. They learned that strength did not come from fear, but from freedom, that unity was not enforced through violence, but inspired through opportunity.